told me not to come to my own sister's wedding rehearsal dinner. Not in a cruel way. They never do anything in an outright cruel way. My mother called it a space issue. 43 people on the guest list, she said, and the private room at the restaurant only fits 42. Someone had to sit out. That someone was me. What my mother did not say, what she never says out loud, is that the rehearsal dinner was being held at a restaurant my in-laws' account had been funding for the past 6 years. What she did not say is that the private room they were eating in, the one that allegedly only fits 42, was booked under a corporate card that traces back to an LLC that I set up, funded, and maintained since I was 26 years old. What she did not say is that I was the 43rd person who had been quietly making all 42 of the other spots possible. I said okay. I did not argue. I told her I understood, that I hoped everyone had a wonderful time, and that I would see them at the ceremony the next day. Then I hung up the phone, sat down at my kitchen table in Columbus, and opened my laptop. I want to be clear about something before I tell you the rest of this. I am not a person who enjoys conflict. I was not raised to be one. I was raised to be the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who figures things out so that everyone else does not have to. I was the kid who got a part-time job at 16, so my parents would not have to stress about groceries the week before Christmas. I was the one who drove my sister to her SAT prep every Saturday morning for a year, even though I had my own job and my own life and my own things I was giving up to do it. I was the engine, and for a long time I did not mind being the engine. I thought that was just what love looked like. It took me until I was 31 to understand that I had confused love with liability. My name is Helena. I am 32 now. I am a financial analyst, which is either ironic or fitting depending on how you look at it, because the thing I am best at professionally, assessing risk, identifying bad investments, knowing when to cut losses, is the thing I was worst at personally for most of my adult life. I kept pouring capital into a relationship that had been insolvent for years. Let me give you the actual numbers, because my family always talked about money in the vaguest possible terms. And I think vagueness is how the arrangement survived as long as it did. My parents, I will call them my father and my mother, because that is all they ever really were to me, names on a title, moved to Cincinnati 8 years ago when my father's contracting business started struggling. I was 24, just starting my first real job, living in a studio apartment and eating a lot of pasta. They asked if I could help with the security deposit on a rental. I said yes. That was the door opening. Within 2 years, I was covering their full rent. Then my mother's car note. Then my father's health insurance premiums after the business folded completely. Then my sister Autumn's community college tuition. Twice, because she dropped out the first time and decided to try again. Then the dental work, the vet bills for their 2 dogs, the home warranty plan, the grocery top-offs when my father's disability check didn't come through on time. I kept a spreadsheet, not because I was resentful, at least, not at first, but because I am a financial analyst and keeping spreadsheets is how I process the world. Over 8 years, the number I arrived at was $214,000. Not a loan. A transfer. One-directional, unacknowledged, and apparently invisible because not a single person in my family ever behaved as though it was real. At family dinners, my father talked about Autumn's future with the kind of expansive optimism that costs nothing. At Christmases, my mother made comments about how she wished I would relax more, that I seemed stressed, that I should learn to enjoy life the way Autumn did. Autumn, who had never held a job longer than 4 months. Autumn, who was getting married to a man named Cody who had never held a job longer than 4 months. Autumn, whose rehearsal dinner I had just been disinvited from because the room only fits 42. Here is what nobody in my family knew. 3 years earlier, when my parents were about to be evicted from their Cincinnati rental because the landlord decided to sell the building, I had stepped in and bought them a house. A 3-bedroom Craftsman in Westwood purchased in my name with my financing, with a down payment that came directly out of my savings account. I told myself it was a good investment. I told myself I was being practical. I told myself a lot of things in those years. I paid the mortgage. I paid the property taxes. I kept the homeowner's insurance current. My parents paid nothing, contributed nothing, And here is the part that still makes my chest feel tight when I think about it. Seemed to have genuinely forgotten, or perhaps simply chosen to forget, that the house was mine. By the time of the rehearsal dinner phone call, they had been living in that house for 3 years, and they had just told me there was no room for me at the table. I did not sleep well that night. Not because I was devastated. I want to be honest, the devastation had happened slowly over years, and by that point I was mostly numb. But because I was running calculations. The kind I run at work when a client has been holding a position too long and the fundamentals have turned against them. The question I kept coming back to was not why they did it. I had long since stopped needing to understand the why. The question was what I was going to do about the assets I was still carrying on my personal balance sheet. The answer came to me around 2 in the morning. It was not an angry answer. It was a very quiet, very clear answer, the kind that only comes when you have finally stopped hoping for a different outcome. I went to the wedding the next day. I sat in the 3rd row alone and I watched my sister walk down the aisle in a dress that my mother had mentioned, in passing, cost $4,000. I smiled. I hugged people. I drank exactly 1 glass of champagne and gave a toast that I had written on the drive over. A toast that was warm and genuine and said nothing about any of the things I was thinking. I drove home at 9 o'clock. And then I started making calls. The first call was to my attorney. I had a real estate attorney I had worked with on the house purchase, a sharp woman I trusted completely, and I reached her voicemail and left a message asking her to call me back as soon as possible, because I needed to discuss a property transfer. The second call was to a property management company I'd researched once, idly, during a particularly bad month when I'd briefly entertained the idea of actually treating the house like the investment it legally was. I left them a message too. On Monday morning, I started with the utilities. I want to describe this part carefully, because I know how it sounds from the outside, and I also know how it felt from the inside, and those two things are very different. I did not call my parents. I did not send an email. I did not give a speech or write a letter or stage any kind of confrontation, because I had watched enough family drama play out over the years to know that confrontation gives people a role to perform. It gives them the opportunity to be the victim. I was not interested in giving anyone an opportunity. I simply began to rearrange what was mine. The streaming subscriptions were first, 3 of them, all on my card, all used primarily by my parents in autumn when she visited. I logged in and removed the devices. 30 seconds per account. The cable and internet bundle came next. My father had a very particular relationship with sports television that I had been subsidizing for years. I called the provider, verified that I was the account holder. Because I had always been, and I requested a service cancellation effective the end of the billing cycle. The representative asked if there was anything they could do to keep my business. I said no thank you. The home warranty plan I had been paying annually, the one that covered the HVAC and the water heater and the appliances, I let lapse. I had been meaning to cancel it for months anyway. It had cost me $840 a year for 3 years. Then I waited. It took 11 days. My father called on a Tuesday evening. I was at the gym, which is the one place I have always been able to think clearly, and I saw his name on my screen, and I let it ring. He left a voicemail. His voice was confused, not yet alarmed. He said the internet had stopped working and he thought maybe there was an outage. Did I know anything about it? He said the TV package was showing an error. He said, could I look into it? I listened to the voicemail twice. Then I put my phone back in my bag and finished my workout. My mother called 2 days later. Her message was shorter. She said things seemed to be going wrong with the house bills and she didn't understand it and could I please call her back? I called my attorney instead. By that point we had already spoken twice. She had walked me through my options clearly and without judgment, which is one of the things I appreciate most about working with professionals. They deal in facts, not feelings. The facts were these. The house was in my name. There was no lease agreement in place, no rent-to-own arrangement, nothing that legally classified my parents as tenants with statutory protections. What existed was a verbal, informal arrangement that, in the state of Ohio, left me with significant latitude. I was not a landlord evicting tenants. I was an owner reclaiming a property. She recommended I put everything in writing. A formal notice of intent to reclaim the property for personal use, with a 60-day window for the occupants to vacate. 60 days was more than the law required in the absence of a lease. It was also, she noted, more than generous given the circumstances. I told her to draft it. The letter went out by certified mail on a Thursday. I know my parents received it on a Saturday because the tracking notification arrived on my phone while I was at brunch with a friend, and my father called me 6 times in a row within 20 minutes of the confirmed delivery. I did not answer. He left one voicemail. In it, he said, and I am paraphrasing because I am not going to replay it word for word here. He said that this was a misunderstanding, that the house was their home, that I had given it to them, that I couldn't do this, that I needed to call him back immediately, that my mother was very upset, that Autumn was very upset, that I was being cruel, that I was acting crazy, and that if I didn't call him back he was going to drive up to Columbus. I texted my attorney and forwarded the voicemail. She said it was fine, that this was a normal response and that I should continue not engaging directly. He did not drive to Columbus. What happened instead, and this is the part I was not prepared for, even though I probably should have been, is that Autumn called me. It was a Sunday afternoon, about 10 days after the letter arrived, and I picked up because I had not spoken to her since the wedding, and part of me was still hoping, even then, that she might surprise me. She did not surprise me. She told me that I was destroying the family. She told me that our parents were elderly. They are in their early 60s, which is not elderly, but Autumn has always dealt in exaggeration, and that I was putting them out on the street. She told me that Cody was furious on her behalf, which I found very funny, though I did not laugh. She told me that I had always had a problem with her happiness, that I had never truly supported her, and that this was proof of how selfish I really was. There is a particular kind of silence that happens inside you when someone who has consumed a significant portion of your life's resources calls you selfish. It is not an angry silence. It is almost peaceful, in a bleak sort of way, like a final confirmation of a hypothesis you had been hoping to disprove. I let her finish. Then I said very calmly that I loved her, that I wished her and Cody a good life, and that I had nothing else to add. And I ended the call. What came next was the whisper campaign. This is a term I learned in a professional context, but it applies perfectly to families like mine. Within a week, I had received messages from an aunt I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, 2 of my mother's friends who somehow had my number, and my father's brother, who lives in Florida and has not visited anyone in Ohio since 2019. They all said variations of the same thing, that what I was doing was heartless, that family is family, that I should reconsider. None of them, notably, offered to take my parents in. None of them offered to contribute to the mortgage I had been paying for 3 years. None of them mentioned that $214,000. I do not think they knew about it. I do not think my parents had ever framed it that way. In the story my family told about itself, I was the distant one, the one who was always busy with work, the one who had moved away and never really stayed connected. The financial undergirding of their entire lives was invisible in that story because it had to be invisible. A story in which I was the bad daughter does not work if everyone can see the receipts. I did not respond to any of the extended family messages. I did not explain myself. I did not send the receipts, though I thought about it. My attorney had advised against it, not for legal reasons but practical ones. Sending receipts, she said, invites negotiation. Silence invites nothing. The 60 days passed. My parents found a rental, a 2-bedroom apartment in a suburb of Cincinnati, less expensive than what the house would have cost them in any kind of realistic rental scenario. I know this because I had, quietly, researched what fair market rent for the Westwood property would be. It was $2,200 a month. For 3 years they had been living there for free. The math on that alone is staggering, separate from everything else. They moved out on a Wednesday. I know because the property management company sent me photos, standard move-out documentation. The house was in reasonable condition, a few scuffs on the walls, a broken towel bar in the second bathroom, a patch of dead grass in the backyard where my father had apparently kept a grill without a mat underneath it. Nothing that couldn't be handled. The property management company had a tenant lined up within 3 weeks, a young couple, both teachers. They signed a 1-year lease at $2,100 a month. The first deposit hit my account on the 1st of the following month, and I sat with my coffee and looked at the number on my screen for a long time. Here is what I want to tell you, and I want to tell it plainly, because I think this part often gets lost in these kinds of stories. I did not feel triumphant. I had expected to feel triumphant, or at least relieved, and for the first few weeks after the move-out I kept waiting for the satisfaction to arrive. It did not arrive in the form I expected. What came instead was something quieter, a gradual loosening, like a muscle that has been clenched for so long you forgot it wasn't supposed to be that tight. I started sleeping through the night. I stopped doing the mental math every time an expense came up, calculating whether I could cover mine and theirs simultaneously. I cooked dinner without thinking about whether I should be sending grocery money instead. I went on a trip, New Orleans, just me, 4 days. I ate at restaurants I had been putting off for years because they felt indulgent. I walked slowly. I did not check my phone compulsively. It sounds like a small thing. It was the least small thing I had done for myself in years. My parents have not contacted me directly since the move-out. I do not know if that is pride or anger or something else. I have not contacted them either. I think we have each, in our own way, arrived at an understanding of what the relationship actually was, now that the financial architecture holding it together has been dismantled. Autumn sent me a text on Thanksgiving. It said, "Hope you're okay," that was all. I sat with it for a while. I did not respond. Not out of cruelty, I want to be clear about that, but because I genuinely did not know what to say that would be true, and also kind. And I have reached an age where I am no longer willing to sacrifice one for the other. If there is a lesson here, I am reluctant to package it neatly, because I think the packaging is usually where the truth gets lost. What I can tell you is what is true for me. I spent a decade believing that financial generosity was the same thing as emotional connection. It is not. You can fund every aspect of someone's life and be completely invisible to them as a person. You can be the infrastructure that everything runs on and still be excluded from the room. The house is just a house. The money is just money. What I was actually trying to buy, for 14 years, was a seat at a table where the people I loved would look at me and see someone worth keeping. I had the deed. I never had the seat. I am not looking for it anymore. And that, more than anything else, is what the 60-day notice actually said. If you have been the engine in your family, if you have been the one who makes it all run while everyone else gets to simply live inside what you've built, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to stop. Not because they deserve to struggle. Not because you want them to fail, but because you are not a utility. You are a person, and somewhere in the years of covering and carrying and quietly absorbing every gap they couldn't fill, you forgot that. I forgot that. I am remembering now. It turns out remembering feels a lot like relief. I used to think that the opposite of being taken for granted was being appreciated. I spent years chasing that, doing more, giving more, covering more, as if eventually the sheer volume of what I contributed would become impossible to ignore. It never did, and I think that is because the people who take you for granted are not failing to notice you. They are actively choosing not to. There is a difference, and understanding that difference is what finally changed things for me. What happened with my family was not an accident of circumstance. It was a pattern, sustained over years by choices that everyone involved made repeatedly. My parents chose to receive without acknowledging. My sister chose to consume without reciprocating. And I chose again and again to interpret their silence as a temporary condition rather than a permanent one. That was my part in it. I am not saying that to be hard on myself. I am saying it because I think it is the honest version of the story, and the honest version is the only one that actually leads anywhere useful. The hardest thing I have ever done was not sending the 60-day notice. The hardest thing was the years before it, when I kept finding reasons to stay, keep giving, keep hoping. Courage is easy to identify in retrospect. In the moment, it looked a lot like confusion. It looked like lying awake doing math. It looked like rehearsing conversations I never had. Real intelligence, the kind that matters, is not just knowing the facts, it is being willing to act on them even when the action costs you something. Even when the thing it costs you is the version of your family you always wanted them to be. I think about Helena, about myself, sitting at that wedding, smiling, giving a toast, behaving in every outward way like a person who belonged there. And in a technical sense, I did belong there. I had paid for most of it, in one way or another, across years of quiet transfer, but belonging is not the same as being included. I had the receipts, I never had the welcome. What I know now, that I did not know at 24 or 27 or even 30, is that dignity is not something other people grant you. It is something you maintain by refusing to negotiate it away, even slowly, even in small amounts, even for people you love. Every time I covered a bill without acknowledgement, every time I accepted being excluded without naming it, I was making a small withdrawal from something I could not afford to keep losing. By the time of the rehearsal dinner, the account was empty. The house is rented now. The tenants are good people. The rent hits my account on the first of every month, and every time it does, I think about what it actually represents. Not a financial recovery, though it is that too, but proof that what I built was real, that it had value, that I had value, independent of what anyone in my family was willing to reflect back at me. You do not need a confrontation to reclaim your life. You do not need the last word, or the dramatic exit, or the moment where everyone finally understands what they had. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop. Stop funding what is draining you. Stop waiting for recognition that is never coming. Stop shrinking yourself to fit inside a space that was never really made for you. Autumn texted me on Thanksgiving. 2 words. I sat with them for a long time. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but because I had finally learned that not every open door needs to be walked through. Some doors you are allowed to simply close, quietly, on your way to somewhere better.